So first thing I was doing, I drew just an oval for his head, and then I made it a little bit bigger, and now I've made it bigger, I'm going to start drawing out from the large areas first. So you start on the larger masses first in portraiture. So first of all, the most important one would be to get the height and width of the head. Get those measurements right first. So I'm just using comparative measuring. So I'm holding the pencil up at the image of Dylan and then putting that onto the paper. And Dylan's face it's in equal thirds really. So you got the first third, which is from the hairline to the eyebrows, second third from the eyebrows to the nose, and third from the nose to the chin. The chin's just slightly longer. Then I'm looking at the angle that his head, the tilt of his head, and I'm putting where I made the marks for where the eyebrows are, the nose, etc. I'm doing the same angle, so I get the tilt right. I'm just using a 4B pencil as well to do this. When you start drawing a portrait, you go from the large areas first, like I said, from the sides of the head, put in the mass of the hair, establish the thirds of the face, and draw in a centre line, and then just block in the details, like the eyes, where the eyes would go, like the eye sockets, and the nose. And then establish where the mouth is. See, just doing all the bigger shapes. I think it's one of the most challenging things is drawing a portrait, because there's so much detail in a person's face. And then you've got to try to discipline yourself to ignore the detail at first and just get in the basic structure. So looking there where the head turns away, so the temple area, which will be more flat, and then the natural curves of the face where the cheekbone is. I'm thinking about where his eyes might be. getting the eyes right can be really challenging. So it's better to draw around like the eye sockets and the areas around the eyes first, then basic shape of the eyes before you put any details in. And Dylan's eyes were quite challenging because the angle of his eyes. Yeah, Dylan Thomas died in 1953. So I got a photo of him. I think he was in New York, or he was in America touring. And it was a black and white photo, so a really popular photo of him. I need to do more drawing really, because I tend to spend most of my time doing paintings. Although when you're painting you are drawing with a paintbrush, so you can't really separate the two. But this is not going to be a rendered drawing though of Dylan, because I'm just using it for the painting. All I read really is the outlines of his face, and then I can transfer those onto the canvas to do the painting. When you do the first painting stage, or the underpainting, that still is part of the drawing process, so any mistakes that you've made can be corrected during the first painting stage. Okay, well I'm just setting my palette up now, so I'm just going to do a black and white underpainting, a grisaille, and just to keep it simple. And I'm using a mixture of Griffin Alkyd fast drying ivory black and normal ivory black, and the same on the whites, so Griffin Alkyd titanium white and normal titanium white. And I'll mix these two together, and the reason I'm doing that is that the ivory black and the white are really quite slow dryers, so with it being the underpainting I want it to dry pretty quick. And you could just use Griffin Alkyd if you wanted to, but I'm quite slow sometimes at painting, so I don't want it to dry too quick because it starts getting a bit tacky on the palette. So if I mix those two together, then it gives me a bit more workable time. So I'll just mix the ivory black up And I'll do the same with the white. Move these out of the way. And then basically you just kind of, I want to create values from dark, gradually going lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter. And then with these steps, I will then put them onto the underpainting for Dylan. Got some black in there. So basically you can see the process I'm using there. As I'm painting, I'll adjust this, so if I need something a bit darker than that, I'll just mix a bit black into there, or a bit lighter than that, I'll do the same. So as I'm painting, I'm tweaking around and selecting the values that I need. And okay, so let's crack on with the underpainting. After I'd finished doing the drawing out Dylan and transfer it onto the canvas, I noticed I got a couple of things wrong. So at the middle of his lips there, so they were a bit low, so I've lifted those up a bit, and his nose was coming down a little bit round there, so I've just reshaped that. And his eyes, I just moved those up a little bit. They weren't far off the eyes. They were really tricky to draw his eyes because the angle, but I don't know if it's still 100% correct. But when you do the underpainting stage, it's kind of part of the drawing stage, so you're still correcting things. Also, I had his hair a little bit too high, so I brought that down. And I did move his ear over when I was drawing, because I thought I'd got the width of his head wrong. But when I checked, I'd moved it too far over, so I'd moved his ear back a little bit. And I had the width here a bit too narrow. But anyway, that's all part of the drawing process, and it means you've got to improve yourself as an artist, really, to get things better before you start painting. But there are probably still some things not quite right on here, so I'll kind of, as I'm painting the underpainting, which is one of the purposes for the underpainting, is to carry on making the corrections. I really just roughed in this bow tie as well, but I did that slightly too high. I didn't really measure that, I just kind of which shows me I shouldn't be too impatient, really. But anyway, let's crack on with the underpainting stage and see how that goes. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm just going to paint the background in quickly around Dylan, and that'll isolate him from the background and then kind of bring him forward, and also help me when I'm judging my values. And I'm going to be painting the underpainting in black and white, as you saw from the palette info, the palette setup. Yeah, I'm just speeding up this background bit because it's boring. Just a bit of light and dark. It's quite enjoyable, and so it's quite enjoyable doing a black and white underpainting because you kind of simplifying the process, so you're not having to think about picking colours, so you can just concentrate on the values and the correct proportions. I was making it a bit darker towards the face of Dylan, the background, and lighter behind, as if lights going past him and bouncing off the back wall. So I just thought I'd start with his hair first, looking at the darker areas of it, and then I'll kind of put that in loosely, and then I'll do the lighter areas. It's quite therapeutic as well, painting like this, so you can listen to a bit of music and just lose yourself in the painting process. I'm using rosemary brushes, again mostly the rosemary ivory brushes, because they're much more durable and you can really work the paint in. I put the paint on quite thick in the underpainting, and then thinner when I paint the colour over it, and don't really use any medium in the paint. And putting it on more thickly, the underpainting, it makes the second painting a nicer experience because the paint goes on easier, because you've got that surface to work onto. The thing as well when you start doing this is not to get too worried about when you're putting paint on and it's looking all patchy. Just look at the values of Dylan's hair, or if you're going to do a underpainting in black and white, look at the values of the person's hair and then start putting in the darker values first and work up lighter and lighter. And don't worry about all the patches everywhere, because you'll render it all together as you get all the paint on. And once you start getting the paint on, it's much easier as well to start hitting the correct values as you're judging different areas, lighter areas. One thing to remember as well, when you do the underpainting, unless you're doing a glazing over it, so you're going to retain the underpainting, the details in it. And if you're going to do that, you could work it into a fine, almost a finished painting of how you want it, and then glaze transparent colours over it. But because I'm going to be painting, covering the underpainting, I'm not getting too drawn into details because it would just be a waste of time spending all the effort to get things right and then painting over it. So I'm just loosely putting brush strokes in where I can see the lights and the darks, and making it look a bit looser, his hair, as it's coming out, as it's extending out into the background. Trying to make it look a bit more realistic. Also, when you look at these, if you're working from a photograph, if you look where the light's hitting the subject and try to create that form using the dark and the light to try to create that 3D effect of the subject going away from the light. So if you don't do that, it's going to look a bit flat. So use the photograph as more as a reference, to get your proportions right, and the values, but use a bit of artistic license as well, because photographs can flatten out the image. So if you're copying off a photograph exactly, the chances are you'll end up with a pretty flat looking painting. So kind of a bit of, use a bit of that artistic license and look at the form of the hair or, the head, and paint it so it's got more of a 3D. Like for instance, if the light's coming down from the top of Dylan now, and it's the closest part to it hitting, after his hair, is the top of his forehead. But if you paint that too light, then it's going to look pretty flat compared as you come down the forehead towards his eyebrows. So I generally paint that darker than it looks, to give the feeling that it's going away from the viewer, going away from you, like turning away, like a sphere shape. So you should copy what you see and not copy what you see, but being sensible about it. I'm doing the same thing here with Dylan's forehead. I'm just putting the paint on in bigger areas, and then I'll, work into it a bit with a bit more detail. side of his head there, of course, because of the planes of the head as they're turning away from the light. Where his temple is on the side, that would obviously be darker, and still keeping that 3D, that sphere shape in the back of your mind as you're painting these areas in. Also, one of the problems of using a photograph that you haven't kind of controlled the light, there could be light coming from Dylan's left side, bouncing off the wall and onto his temple, which will make it look lighter. But then if you paint it in as you see in the photo, going from one side of the forehead to the other, it's going to look really kind of flat. So like with the top of the forehead, use your judgment and paint that temple side in darker, so it's giving that 3D effect to it. If you need to, that is. It's really a balancing act when you first start putting the paints on, until you get that sense of form as you keep working it. Yeah, one of the things I tend to do is, like when I was painting Dylan's forehead there, I kind of lost interest a little bit and would rather just move on to his eyes. So, to keep me engaged. And that Dylan's right eye that I'm working on, that was a really tricky one to do. If you ever look at the photo of Dylan, the angle of the eye, and it's kind of almost protruding. So it wasn't, a perfect circle for his iris. It was, kind of an oval. If you're new to portraiture, you really want to learn it, it might be worth having a friend or family just looking head on, and if you want to use a photograph, get a photo of them that way. You could maybe draw if you're taking a photo inside the house, draw the curtains a little bit just to create a dark and lighter side to the photograph to get some contrast in it. If you take a photo of somebody outside, which you can still paint, no problem with doing that, but the whole face will be kind of lit up, so you're not going to get great variation from dark to light. It wasn't a great photo of Dylan for me to use because it wasn't great quality, and it was a bit, the details, like where I'm painting around his eye, kind of weren't very sharp. So trying to get the distinction, or the separation from the eye socket to the eyeball, and it was all looking dark. That was pretty tough to do that, but you have to just keep working and tweaking around until it looks right, really. But then you can lose your proportions if you're not careful, and you have to, double check your measurements. So if you start moving things around, always remember that you'll be changing your proportions, and to make sure you double check them. So how Dylan's right eye is looking there, almost at an angle looking up, but that's because the background, obviously the eye socket is dark as well, so that's probably picking some of that up. If you're worried about values, if you're quite new to painting, you could download a value chart off the internet and print it out. Probably the best ones are value scale of 1 to 9, and you could mix up, say, 9 of the 9 colours of the black and the white, from one value, from the lightest to the darkest, and just check them with your value scale, and then you've got those 9 steps of paint mixed up on your palette. You could just stick to those and just instead of mixing them into each other, just work from those 9 values, and your underpainting will still look pretty good. And then that takes another complication out of it for you, because when you're learning to paint, there's so much to think about all the time. My challenge for this one is going to be the second painting, in which I'm going to paint colour onto Dylan, and I've got to use my imagination to do that, and some of my experience from painting, because I've got no, obviously, reference to go on of what his skin tone was like, and the warms and the cools of the skin tones. So that will be quite testing a lot of thinking on my part when I do start the second painting. And because this is for an online course, and they're just going to get a taste, they won't get the full video like this, but they wanted a video pretty quick, so I had to kind of nail this painting of Dylan. So I'm just doing the voiceover now, so of course I have painted the colour, the second painting for it, but I just had to kind of go as quick as I could, really. yeah, so on this online course I'll be talking about obviously drawing out your subject, just general information about that. So the average face, you could put it into 3 equal thirds, and you know, the structure of that and how to draw in the details. And then from there, once you're happy with the drawing, then transfer that onto a canvas, unless you want to draw directly onto the canvas. And then of course it would be using the ivory black and titanium and white to, as we're doing now, to build up the underpainting. And then you know, being good with your values, and once you're happy with that underpainting, let that dry, which I've used quick drying paint, so it'll be pretty quick. Then the colour palette, how to mix up skin tones and best colours to use for a portrait, or maybe not the best, but the ones I find really practical. And so I'll do a quick demo on how to mix some skin tones up and talk about cool warm colours and cool colours. Yeah, portrait subjects, what people are interested in. And there's different ways to paint as well, of course, because you can paint more precisely than I'm doing here, and build up your painting, making sure that you have all your all the facial features are spot on. And then you could use quick drying, medium like liquid, and just start working. Not bother doing an underpainting, but just start painting in from the darks, like the eyes, nostrils, the ears, the dark parts of the ears. It's got dark hair, the hair, and then progressively working your way up. So you paint in different areas of the face, but you bring it all together with you know, by using layers. So you could paint, say, the top of a nose, which is hitting the light with a light paint, and you could paint down the side of the nose with the dark paint. But that transition line from as the nose, of the edge of the nose goes over, you could, when the top and the sides dry, you could then paint that in and kind of then blend that in, or, you know, work that into or over the other paint. Of course, you paint the lips in as well, because you've got the dark areas in between the mouth. And yeah, still working around that eye. And now you can see that right eye, because I've painted the darker areas of the eye socket around it, it kind of looks a little bit better. Okay, on to the next eye. First of all, a bit of black for the pupil. This again was quite a tricky eye because he's kind of looking away a bit, so, and it's the quality of the photograph I was looking at. His iris doesn't look totally round, it's kind of, because it's going away a little bit, it's more oval. It was hard to see the definition of where the iris, you know, how wide it was or how long it was. Yeah, it was quite a, this, you know, doing this painting had its challenges. Now as I'm painting the eyeball, I'm using the same thought process that it's a, obviously it's a sphere, so I'm just thinking about creating that almost if light was shining down on a billiard ball, a white billiard ball. So, and how, you know, the light would fall away as the billiard ball goes away. I'm kind of thinking like that as I'm painting his left eye in. One artist I really like is an American artist called Daniel Sprick. His paintings are fantastic. So I was watching a bit of him last night on YouTube. He paints in a totally different way to this, because he uses, I think he uses liquid anyway. I'm sure on one of the YouTube videos I've heard him say he uses liquid. And he builds his paintings up, his portraits up in layers. But he's fantastic. Very humble as well, really comes across really nice. And his still life paintings are awesome as well. The detail he puts in, and you know, he even paints little insects, like dead little insects on the back, or eggshells. He puts those in with his still life setups just to give a contrast of maybe the sharp and the white of the eggshell in contrast with, you know, some other objects he's painting. Also, he does amazing landscape paintings. Another great artist I like as well is Cesar Santos. He studied at the Angel Academy in Florence, and his portraits are awesome as well. But he paints more wet into wet, so his paintings I think are probably a lot quicker than Daniel Sprick's. But I follow Cesar Santos on YouTube, but it was great on, I think a couple of years ago, Cesar Santos was out doing some landscape painting and with two other artists, and one of them was Daniel Sprick. So I thought it was great to have both of those in the same YouTube video that I could watch. portrait painters I like from the past are, well, one of my favourites is Singer Sargent. Yeah, he was obviously very fast as well, very direct way of painting, but his paintings are, brilliant. Almost look like they were effortless to him. So you see the fast brush strokes, but when you step back from the painting, it all just comes together and looks so realistic. So kind of just painting around the shadow areas around the eye now. I'm looking at the Dylan's photo all the time as well as I'm painting, double checking. Yeah, even painting the shadow around Dylan's eye and the detail, it kind of makes, when you look at his eyeball, it kind of gets easy to see what's right or wrong with it, the more detail you put around it. So if you have a problem and an eye's not looking right, you shouldn't start going into the eye and, straight away and changing the iris or how wide the eye is and how long. The first thing you should do is look around the eye and kind of work around those areas and work your way back into it. So you're kind of eliminating, you're starting from the largest structure of the eye or around the eye, and then you can narrow down to what the issue is. That's more of a practical kind of way of solving problems. And it's good also to learn a little bit about the actual structure of, a head and where it's going to be light and where it's going to be dark. Like there, like the bridge of the nose. In between the eyes, I should say, where that kind of, curls down, goes under, turns away from the light, so that's going to be darker. Of course, as well, you can see those shadows with Dylan that when you're painting a male subject, they do tend to be a lot more heavy around the eyes. Often the eyebrows are a lot lower than a lady's, and you get more shade. There's not as much light hitting around there because they're more heavier set. and just above the eyebrows where the eye sockets are. Of course, the eye sockets come out a little bit, so above the eyebrows you often get more light, and often it's kind of a cooler light. It's not got much warmth in it. Top of his forehead I'm still keeping quite dark, and especially on that left part of the top of his forehead, as that's turning away from the light or towards his hairline. Make sure to keep that quite dark. Hope you've got your feet up, having a cup of tea or coffee watching this, because that's the difference with painting portraits and, say, painting something like an orange, is there's so much more detail in it that the videos go on for much longer. So this video is nearly 3 hours for the drawing and the underpainting stage. Nose can be quite intricate as well, with all the little curves and the shadows and the light. And Dylan's he's kind of quite a tough, his facial features are quite tough to paint really, because the shape of his nose as well, which is quite bulbous, how it comes out, at the end. So you want to get it right, so you don't want his nose to look too flat or too bulbous. So the first thing I'm doing, it's like with the eyes, I'm starting on the kind of around the nose and the nostrils before I start building the form of the nose up. I like painting portraits best out of all the subjects I paint. I don't know why, I just love painting skin tones, and it's just great. But then you get artists who, like John Constable, who would have felt the same about painting landscapes. It's funny how we're all drawn to, different things, and that's a good thing with art, that there's so much variety in it. Different ways to paint, different subjects to paint, different paint mediums like acrylic, oils, watercolour. And that's one thing with painting portraits, you do have to be quite patient, because there's so much intricate areas on a person's face. Of course, I live as well not far from where Dylan lived, in Larne. And as well as painting, I also work at the Dylan Thomas Boathouse, where he lived for the last 4 years of his life. So it's quite an easy subject for me to have, to paint Dylan, because obviously I know quite a lot about him. And I've painted him before in the past, so he lived in Larne 1949 to 1953. He was touring America in 1953, where he died in New York. Aged just 39. He had lived in Larne previously, but moved out and lived in other areas. Lived in London for a period of time, and other places in Wales, like Newquay. He had 3 children. Colm, Aronwy, and Llewellyn. He's a great poet. Just up from the boathouse as well is the shed, the writing shed, where he used to do all his work, where he could look over across the Tav estuary. And then when he fancied a pint, he'd go off to the Brown's Hotel, in lawn and have a pint there. You could also do an underpainting in warmer oil colours as well if you didn't like the coolness of using ivory black and titanium white. You could do something like raw umber, light red and titanium white, so that would give you a warmer underpainting. Because I think one of the things we're painting onto the black and white is paint can be quite transparent, so the coolness of the ivory black and titanium white could come through into the oil paint, especially over time as paint goes more transparent over the years. But then you're not going to have those darkest darks, because the darkest you'll be able to go to is the raw umber, which is quite dark. So I will do a painting, and for the underpainting I will use those three colours as a demonstration, just to show you that way as well. Yeah, I can see his nose is not still not quite the right shape, and it's that thing of making it look too bulbous, which is very easy to do with Dylan's nose. if you use the Griffin Alkyd oil paints, as I've mixed half and half with normal titanium white and Griffin Alkyd, you do need to work in somewhere that's quite well ventilated, because those Griffin paints, they do have a very strong odour, and they do warn that you should work in a well ventilated area, because it won't be very healthy to breathe those fumes in all day. I only use the Griffin paints for the underpainting stage, and then I just use linseed oil for the second painting stage. So that's all natural and quite healthy to use that. Because this painting has gone for quite some time, it might be worth, if you're going to start painting yourself and you're going to follow this method, have it on your computer or your laptop as you're painting, and kind of go along with it as I'm doing the painting. If you're a fan of Dylan Thomas, you could even do this same painting. Yeah, I think the painting does go on for, when you're doing portraits, they do go on for quite some time, is because when you paint one area, then you start the next area, and you paint the other area, and then it highlights what's wrong with the previous area you just painted. So you're constantly, going back into correcting things. The American artist Helen Van Wyck, who passed away some time ago, but there's lots of videos on YouTube, instructional videos of her. She said, doing painting, and especially portraits, it's just a series of mistakes. So you just correcting things all the time. That's what a painting is, just full of mistakes that you keep putting right. I'm working on a white background, but you could tone your canvas as well if you didn't want all, that white coming through. You could use a middle tone if you stained your canvas. Might make it easier to select the values, so you're kind of in the middle of the light and the dark. And that's what some artists do, although a lot of artists do that actually. when I've done the voiceover for this, I tend to do the painting, then edit the video down so it's focused on the painting stages, because sometimes you're stopping while you're painting and checking things, especially when you're painting the colours, and you might be mixing some colours up or checking values, but I tend just to cut all that out. So I'd find it hard to talk as well while I'm painting, and especially because it can go on for quite some time. So I tend to film the painting process and then do a voiceover, and then I'll add some music to it. So hopefully whatever music I've picked for this you'll be listening to now. I hope you're enjoying it. If you pre-mixed your 9 steps up from light to dark, and you've got those little mounds of paint on your palette, they're called, you can do that with your colours as well, they call them strings. And it could, make it more, simplify the process. When I get to the colour stage of the painting, I would probably mix up 4 or 5 colours, dark to light, and mix some cool colours to complement them, same values, and some warm colours. And then basically the colours straight from the tube, like light red, cadmium red, yellow ochre, etc. Use those to adjust the pre-mixed colours that you got on your palette. You get used to it, and it seems a lot quicker way to paint than spending a few hours mixing all your different steps up for the different colours and the different strings. You only need to mix 4 or 5 up, and you can just work from those. Because I have empty paint tubes, so I've pre-mixed some cool colours and some warm colours and different values, so they're already pre-mixed in tubes. So once I've mixed the 4 or 5 steps up, say for Dylan, I'll just squeeze out the warm and the cool colours from the tubes onto the palette. So I'm not wasting or taking the time to sit there and mix those up as well. It's more efficient because you've got enough to think about when you're doing a portrait as it is. You want to make things as easy as you can. Kind of make the process more enjoyable. Dylan's got quite full lips, so they tend to come out, protrude out a little way. Yes, he's got quite a nose. His nose is quite large, so that kind of protrudes out, and his eyes as well almost look like, unless it's just the angle that we're looking at him, they kind of almost protrude out, and then his lips protrude out He's kind of got that kind of face. Yeah, the ears can be quite intricate as well. You know, it all adds to that's why it takes you so long to do a portrait, because all the little shapes of the ear and the curves and the light and the dark. Yeah, I've actually made a mistake there with Dylan's ear. I can really see now looking at it from the computer screen as I'm doing the voiceover. It's too low. I do realise at some point. There was a story about the British artist Millais, and he'd done a portrait of somebody, and for some reason it just didn't look right. So, of course, he would obviously do the sittings live back then. So he went back countless times. I don't know how many times, but he went back a lot, repainting the portrait because something seemed not right, and he couldn't work out what it was. And eventually, he realised after going back over and over and over again, he realised he'd got I think it might have been a lady he was painting, and he'd got her ear in the wrong place, and that's what was causing all the problem. Just made me think of that now when looking at how I've got Dylan's ear in the wrong place. sometimes when you're sitting right up close to your painting, you know something's telling you that something's not right, but you need to step back really and get a better look. Because when you're close up, and I sit down when I'm painting, it's really easy to miss things that are not quite right. It's probably my least favourite area to paint is an ear, because I think you've done all the hard work getting, the eyes right and the nose right and the mouth. You tend to leave the ear till last, and then it's all intricate, and you think you just want to finish the portrait, and you're having to try to be patient for longer and do all these little intricate areas around the ear. Hurry up, hold on and paint that ear. I'm spending all that time doing all the intricate little areas and I'm going to have to paint over it.